ISIS. This video is really an attempt to explain where ISIS comes from, what is it doing in the Middle East, and how do we explain the terrible civil wars that have racked both Iraq and Syria. What I would like to do is to follow one aspect of this conflict, and that's identity. I'm going to present you with an argument about identity and nation building in the Middle East. Now, there are other elements that are just as important to explaining this phenomenon. There is the economic struggle between rich and poor. There is the struggle between people from the countryside and the city, which is so important in this region. There is the role of outside powers, the United States, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, all of which have jumped into this struggle, and Russia too. But for the sake of this video, let me concentrate on one element, which is identity, which has been at the heart of the nation-building process. And in order to make this argument, I want to compare what's happening in the Levant. That means the countries of Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon. What's happening in this larger part of the Middle East to what happened in Central Europe during the interwar period. Now, why would I argue for this comparison? A number of reasons. First, all of the nation states, stretching from Poland all the way down to Palestine, are part of the class of 1919. They were created out of big multi-ethnic, multi-religious empires in 1919 at the Paris Peace Conference at the end of World War I. World War I has often been called the empire-destroying war because it demonstrated how efficient and how powerful the nation-state was as an organism, and how weak empires were and how dated. The empires of Russia, Germany, Austro-Hungary, and for our purposes, the Ottoman Empire were all destroyed in this war. And the European powers drew new lines, creating new nations to redistribute the entire territory. In every one of these cases, numerous different peoples from different religions and different ethnicities were stuck together within national borders, many of whom did not want to live together. And this led to spectacular failure in almost every single case. It leads to what I've argued is the great sorting out, what I've called the great sorting out. And that is war between these different ethnic groups trapped in one nation over who's going to be the dominant ethnic group. It is a long and bloody process. For minorities, it's usually a zero-sum game. And we see many minorities being ethnically cleansed. In the case of the Jews in Europe, of course, there's the Holocaust, and they're exterminated. But there's a rearrangement of peoples within all these nation states. In Europe, the borders are not changed to fit the people. By and large, the people are changed to fit the borders. And this leads to massive ethnic cleansing. If we take Poland, for example, 64% of Polish people were Poles before the World War II. By the end of World War II, Poland is 100% Polish. 3 million Jews were destroyed, Polish Jews were destroyed. And between 1945 and 50, 7 million Germans were expelled from Poland or killed, as well as Eastern Prussia, which is just above Poland. Between 1944 and 1948, in all of Central Europe, 31 million people were ethnically cleansed and forced to flee from their homes, to go to other states, like the Ruthenians in Poland who went to Ukraine, or were driven out of the region altogether, like the Jews. If we look at Czechoslovakia, a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was 32% minorities before World War II. By the end of World War II, all of those minorities are gone. The 3 million Sudeten Germans were all ethnically cleansed. If we look at Germans, as you can see in this slide before you, there are about 12 to 13 million Germans scattered about Central Europe in the interwar years. Hitler, in invading all this region, is trying to collect those Germans inside a larger Germany. And he's going to try to kick out the Slavs, the Jews, and everybody who doesn't belong to his notion of a Germany. Now, of course, he fails and is defeated, but in the process, all of these Germans living in Central Europe are ethnically cleansed. 12 million Germans were ethnically cleansed between 1945 and 1947. That's after World War II. And that's part of the nation-building process. Here, in this slide, you will see a little graph of nation-states. Let me speak to you for a second about the nation-state. It is something completely new. New in about 1800. The first two nation-states are really the United States, which has its revolution, throws out the British, creates a constitution, and declares that no longer is the king sovereign, but the people are sovereign. The French Revolution, at almost the same time, is doing the same thing. The head of the king is chopped off, and the people are declared the sovereigns of the nation. So authority is being turned on its head, 180 degrees. No longer is the sovereign the ruler and the people his subjects and his servants, but the people become the sovereigns and the rulers become the servants of the people. And that's why today in US elections, all of our rulers run around telling us that they're public servants and how grateful they are to be able to serve the people, the sovereigns. That revolution of authority, sovereignty, and the notion, the idea of how the world works is very revolutionary. And it isn't something that happens overnight. It's something that's fought for over decades. The first nation states are just a cluster of little nation states in Europe in the beginning of the 19th century. The real nation-building process only picks up speed after World War II and around World War II. 100 different nation states gain independence between 1945, the end of World War II, and 1970. There are 193 nation states that belong to the United Nations. So that means more than half of those nation states got their independence since 1945. They're brand new. Anybody who tells you that we're living in a post-national age of international, transnational organizations clearly lives in Brussels and is looking at the world through a very limited set of binoculars. They're seeing NATO, the UN, the EU, common market. But that's just the central part of the map where nation states were first born and are now creating these transnational organizations. In most of the world, nation states are brand new. And they're still fighting over where their borders are, who's in, who's out, the great sorting out. We see, if you look at 1920 on this map, that there is a big bar shoots up, and that's because the nation states, the class of 1919, are being created in Central Europe and the Ottoman Empire. So to sum up on this little nationalism section here, and to try to reiterate how radical this transformation is, it's important to remember that before 1800, there were no nation states. There were bishoprics, free cities, kingdoms, principalities, emirates, caliphates, shogunates. There was every kind of political organization on the map of the earth, but no nation states. It's only been in the last 200 years that the entire map of the world has been redrawn. People's identities have been recast around a national identity. And not only that their identities have been recast, but sovereignty has been turned on its head. The great chain of being that predominated in the minds of people in the Middle Ages, a chain in which God was in the heavens, and perhaps you had 7 different heavens. You had kings. Of course, I'm forgetting the angels who are up there above the kings, but then you have kings, you have princes, aristocracy, bourgeoisie, commoners, serfs, and various degrees of indentured servants and the unfree, all the way down to slaves. Then you have animals and devils down at the bottom. This great hierarchy, which was the way people envisioned the world until the modern age, until the Enlightenment, destroys this chain of being and declares that all men are created equal, and in a sense flattens the chain into a horizontal line, is transformative. Only about half the nation states of the world today have democracy, have truly arrived at a point where the people are sovereign and the sovereigns are the servants of the people. This giant earthquake that began with the American Revolution and the French Revolution is only spread around the globe very recently. The repercussions are still shaking much of the population of the earth. And that radical transformation is only being carried out. In places like the Middle East, I would argue, it is about nation building. And that's where we see ISIS come from.